about starting the season. It comes in a few different ways. Orisha has a few different pieces of hardware that you can see here on this white plywood at one of our customers' greenhouse. There are different components to the Orisha system. The first one being the central controller. So the way that Orisha works is that there are three main devices that we'll see in the following slides. The first one is the central controller. It is kind of the brain of your system. This one is usually, it has to be close to your internet. It's not obligated to have this device in your greenhouse because it will communicate wirelessly with the relay box that activates your devices and with our sensors, and can communicate with those other devices with wireless radio waves up to 250 feet. So people will usually have their central controller either in their house or in one of their farm building that does have Wi-Fi. So the only thing that there's to do pretty much about it with the central controller when you start your season, and just to plug it in. If you've already set up your Orisha app, once you plug it in, it should take about 3 to 4 minutes, and on your phone, you'll be able to see the Orisha app. If you can't see the Orisha app after a few minutes, it might be because your central controller does not have access to the internet. In that case, it might be because you either changed your Wi-Fi informations, or you just, or maybe you need to go back in your central controller and just reconnect it to the internet. If you don't have access to it, if you don't see that you don't have access to it through your phone, you can just check if the central controller is powered. To have access to the central controller directly, you can go through the central controller wirelessly with your phone. So if you go in your available Wi-Fi's, you should see a Wi-Fi called Orisha. And if the central controller is well powered, you'll see the Wi-Fi called Orisha. You could connect to it to connect to the app directly through this Wi-Fi. If you don't see the Wi-Fi, it's probably a power issue in that case. What I recommend doing is going on our troubleshooting app. You have a link in this slide here, but also there are two other ways to access the Orisha app. You can either go on our website on the support page. There's a link to the troubleshooting app there. There's also another link in the app directly. If you get to the page where it says that your central controller cannot connect to the internet, you'll have a link to the troubleshooting app there. And I'll send a link to that troubleshooting app at the end of our presentation. Second thing you want to set up is your temperature sensor. So usually you have one of those per greenhouse. These communicate wirelessly with your central controller up to 250 feet away. What we recommend for the new season is to put in new batteries. So those are C or D batteries, the big ones. You just have to put 3 of those in the temperature and humidity sensor, and you should be good for about 6 months or pretty much the whole season. These have a really long-lasting life, those sensors. And once you put in the new batteries, you can place it at the center of the greenhouse or somewhere that's a good average of the whole climate that's going to be monitoring. So that's where usually we say at the center. If you put it too much to the side, when your roll-ups open, the sensor might think it's too cold too fast. So that's why we say on the center, and probably not just too close to the exit of your heating. So if you have inflated balloons like this that transfer your heat throughout the greenhouse, you probably don't want to put it too close to a hole of the balloon just so that it would blow hot air on the sensor. Once you've put your your temperature sensor in the greenhouse, you can go in the app and validate that your temperature and humidity sensor is working by going to the settings page in sensors, and you'll see that this information should appear. So you should see the temperature, the humidity, the signal strength, and the batteries. I know that the temperature here is in Celsius, but there's a place in the app where you can also set it up to be in Fahrenheit if you want. If for some reason you wouldn't see those data, if it was all grayed out and you didn't have any temperature and humidity, you can always click on the pencil here and just click Save Again, and that's just going to kind of refresh the signal of the temperature and humidity sensor, and that might just be what you need to get your temperature and humidity sensor going for the season. If that still doesn't work, give us a call. There's also another temperature and humidity sensor that we do use. It's the dry wet bulb sensor. It's another temperature and humidity sensor that we have at Orisha. So we have two different temperature and humidity sensors. They're both for different needs or different personas of customers, I would say. So the advantage of this first one here is that you put batteries in it, and it's pretty much a set and forget sensor. So once it's connected to your central controller, it just goes and you're good. The thing is with this one is that it's since if the sun's hitting on it, or if there's not a lot of air circulation around it, there might develop a little bit of a microclimate, or it might not be as reactive as oh, we lost David. Oh, there you go. Hello again, David. And so with this temperature and humidity sensor that we have here, it might not be as reactive as this one, which has a fan in it. So since it has a fan, this one has to be connected to a power outlet just to power the fan. And the fan, the great advantage is that it just makes sure that the air moves around in the sensor a lot more, and so it's a lot more reactive to the temperature changes in the greenhouse. And the way that it measures humidity is with the dry bulb and wet bulb concept, which by having those two bulbs, you get a really precise measurement of the humidity in the greenhouse. And also, it's a longer lasting sensor than the other one, because on the other sensor, this one, the component that measures the humidity is might drift with time. So the more humidity gets on it, the more it might feel like the humidity is really higher than it actually is. So there's a component that has to be changed every few years. The advantage with this one is that the way it measures humidity is just good for life. So this one's more precise, but it's also a lot more maintenance. You do have to, there's a water bottle in it to keep the wet bulb wet. So you have to fill that water bottle every 2 to 3 weeks. And the way it's connected, it's kind of a string that goes from the water bottle to the wet bulb. And so that string is wet, just so that the bulb is wet too. And so you have to change the string from time to time because it gets dirty, because the air in a greenhouse can be quite dirty. And you have to wash the filter sometimes also. So it's really, two different sensors that are made for two different personas of clients. There are some growers that just want to, set it and forget it, and there are some that want the most precision possible. So you get every kind of sensor for everybody's needs. Once you set it up in the app, you should see your temperature, your humidity, the strength of your signal, and you won't see a battery strength for this one, as this one is plugged into an outlet. I'm seeing that you both disconnected at some point. Is there a problem with my connection? I just want to make sure that you're getting everything I'm saying.
We have a storm going through here and I lost power.
Oh, okay. Well,
and for some reason I lost connection. Don't know why.
Okay. Well, if you ever missed some part, I'm going to send the video afterwards anyway. But if you have any questions, or if there's something you want me to repeat, I can repeat anything.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. By the way, I'm having a little bit of a cold today, so I'm drinking hot water just to make sure that I'm not gonna start coughing uncontrollably during our presentation. So if I'm coughing, sorry in advance. And so then what we recommend also at Orisha is that it's a good thing to have the Orisha's temperature and humidity sensor, but it's also a good thing to add redundancy to your controls in your greenhouse. So to have an external source that can control your heaters, because we try to make Orisha as foolproof as possible, but anything can happen, so it's a good thing to have just redundancy or just a backup that can turn on your furnaces, just so in case that Orisha for some reason cannot turn it on, having a thermostat connected to your furnaces is always a good thing to have. So what you have to do with your thermostat is just to make sure that it's really powered. So check your batteries if there are some, or just make sure that it's connected to an outlet or any kind of current. And then you want to make sure that it's actually able to turn on your furnace. So what you can do is check what's the temperature in your greenhouse on the thermostat, and just put your temperature target on the thermostat higher than the actual temperature in your greenhouse. And if it does start your furnace, then you're good to go. So, and then afterwards, you can just put back the target on the backup thermostat lower than what you'd have your Orisha program be for the temperature management. I'll get back a little bit more on the Orisha programs a bit later. But before that, we have to make sure that our other sensors and our devices are working, and then we can get to the programs. The other sensor that we have is a tension meter or tensiometer, depending on how you like to call it. So those devices are basically soil moisture sensors. The way that they work is they have water in it, and the water goes through this part here that's kind of porous. And so what it measures is the water tension in the soil. So the drier the soil is, the more that the roots of the plants are going to pull on the water available in the soil to bring it in the roots. And so that water is going to be pulled, and that water is going to pull on the water in the tensiometer, and the tension meter is going to feel that pulling by the roots. And so what you have to do before your season to make sure that that this sensor is good to go, there's first a visual inspection. This is made of plastic and rubber, so just make sure that the plastic doesn't have any crack in it, since some people use them kind of roughly. They're in the ground. Sometimes people kick them. Just make sure there are no cracks in it that the water could go through. And we have a little green rubber right here that you just have to make sure that it's not dried out. If it's dry, it might just not make your tensiometer as sealed as it should be. And then there's maybe a bit of cleaning to do. You might want to brush it, bleach it for any algae that might be in it. And then you want to soak it 24 hours before putting it in the ground, so that this little piece right here is just going to be really soaked, and that's going to allow the water transfer from the tension meter to the soil. Ideally, you want to fill it with distilled water, just so that there's no algae that forms in the tension meter. And you might want to color that water too, just so that then you can see what's the level of the water in the tension meter. There's a great video on how to install your tension meter in the ground. I'll send you the links for that video afterward. It's really great. Here at Orisha, when we're doing our tests in the backyard behind our offices, tension meters sometimes are just a bit of a hit or miss in the way you set them in the ground. Just you can set them in, and just if you wiggle it a little bit when you set it in the ground, it might just make a little bit of space between your tension meter and the soil, and so that might make your data a little bit false. And when you irrigate, just water is going to go into that gap that formed when you wiggled it, and so you might have really high or really low tensions because of that. That video shows a really great way to make sure that this doesn't happen. I'll send you the link after the webinar. Multifunction box. So that's basically our relay box. Almost every device in your greenhouse, so furnaces, positive pressure, valves, HAFs, roofs, roll-ups, are all going to be connected in that device. So it's really the relay box that turns on and off relays to turn on and off your devices. I'll get later to what those switches do. But first thing you have to do is basically just connect it to power. And most tests will be done with just making sure that the roll-ups and the other devices work properly with it. So once it's connected to power, also usually when we send a multifunction box or any kind of relay box to our customers, we also send a power bar with it. So just make sure that it's connected into the power bar, and the power bar has a green light on it. So make sure that the light is green, and then you're good to go. Roll-up motors, those are usually a thing we get the most questions about. Right now, we just started the month of March. Here at Orisha, that's what we call March Madness sometimes, because it's the month where everybody wants to buy their system at the same time, and everybody starts their season at the same time, and everybody starts to grow and set up at the same time. And the question we get the most is, how do I set up my roll-ups properly? And that's a question that comes back every year. So I think that's pretty much the most relevant part of this presentation. Some people will like to remove their roll-up motors for winter, and some people will prefer to leave them on. There are pros and cons to both. If you might want to remove them for the winter, just so that they're not stuck in the snow for a few months. If they have been removed, it's important to put them back into place and connect to the multifunction box. Then there are 2 wires coming out of the motors. This one is pretty much the most classic one we see. It has a brown and a blue wire. If your motor does not have those colors, the test that I'm talking about will work as well. But you take those 2 wires and you put them in the 2 holes of a motor relay in the multifunction box. And then when you take the switches on the multifunction box, you put them in the manual. And if you put it up, if you put the arrow up, if the motor goes up, you're good to go. If the motor goes down, you just take those 2 wires and reverse the order, and you're good to go. If you put your motor, if you let your motor on your roll-ups during the winter, just make sure that before doing your tests, your motors are not stuck in the snow, or that there's no ice on your greenhouse plastic. Just because if you do that, your motors might have a hard time lifting the roll-up. And then you want to adjust the limit switches. Limit switches are really, really important on roll-up motors. Limit switches are mechanical interrupters that will make sure that if you get to a certain height, like too high or too low, this limit switch is going to cut the current in the motor just to make sure that it's not going to go too high or too low, and that this could break something. So even if Orisha is able to stop your motor at a certain height, we're great fans of redundancy here at Orisha, so we always want to make sure that these are really well set up. How to set up those limit switches? Yeah, so you have 2 little rolling screws on it. I think we might see it better. Yeah, here you have those 2 little wheels here. What you want to do is, so these are the things that you're going to have to turn just to set up your limit switches. But first, what you want to do is to put the motor at pretty much the middle of the roll-up's height with the multifunction box's switches. And it's better if you have a friend, because you're gonna want to have someone that's close to the multifunction box with the switches and someone that's close to the motor with the limit switches, just so that you can yell to each other when to stop one thing or the other. And so yeah, you start to make the motor go up, and then you turn one of the wheels, and so you have the 2 blue wheels, and they go into a transparent kind of box. But on the other side of the transparent box, you can see the blue wheels turns to white, kind of a white cylinder. And on the cylinder, there's either an orange line or a black line. And so what stops the limit switches is that when the motor go up, the cylinder turns, and when it reaches kind of a little metal clip, it's going to just make the metal clip go up, and that's what cuts the current. So you just have to figure out if it's the left or the right side of that turns off the current when it's going up. Once you know that, let's say it's the left one that has an orange line on it, you know that you can just turn that just to put it as far away from the metal clip, and then you can make your motor go up to the desired height, so as high as you'd want your motor to go to the maximum height. And then what you can do is just like turn again the blue wheel just to align the orange line on the clip, and that's just going to make sure that when the motor is going up, since this line is moving, when it gets to that specific height, the line and the clip are going to be aligned. And so you're going to make sure that at this specific height, the current is going to be stopped for the upper limit switch. So once you're at that desired height, you've aligned the orange line and the clip, you can just screw the screw that's in the blue wheel, and that's going to set up your limit switch at that desired height. And you can do the same thing for the lower limit switch as well with the other blue clip. So that's just going to make sure that, let's say that you forget those switches going up and you don't stop it. Those little 2 clips for up and down are going to stop your motor from going up and down just by aligning the clip and the little line. And when the line pushes on the clip, it stops the current either up and down or down, and keeps your motor from going too high or too low. Does that make sense for you guys? Is it something that you've ever had to do? You've ever had to do?
No, it's nothing I've ever had to do.
No.
Totally
Well,
new information for me.
sorry.
That's totally new information for me. I understand what you're doing with it, but I don't think it's relevant for what I'm doing with my
I understand.
greenhouse. No.
So right now, are you two? Do you both have roll-ups on your greenhouses?
I do, but it's not motorized. I just go
Okay.
out and roll it up every morning and close it
Okay.
down every night. This is a little beyond what I have at the moment. We don't even have electricity except for an extension cord going out there. So
Okay.
this is sort of a future what I might want to do learning.
I get it. This is really I think this is the most technical slide of the whole presentation. We'll get more in what Orisha can do after. But I think just with an extension cord, actually, you're really good to go, because the only power you need, or actually, I would say, if you had to automate one thing in a greenhouse, I'd say that roll-ups would be it, because they're the most time-consuming thing on a greenhouse, especially some days when it's like kind of cold, but there's good amount of sun. It's going to get hot in the greenhouse, but then if there's a cloud coming in, then it's going to get really cold really fast. So if you don't want to always do back and forth to the greenhouse to crank open and crank close the roll-ups, I think that you could save a good amount of time just automating those roll-ups. And to do so, if you just have an extension cord going to the greenhouse, so the only thing you need is actually this one has to be connected into an outlet, and then it's this multifunction box that actually powers the motors. So if you have an outlet, you can automate your roll-ups and save a really decent amount of time.
Okay, good to know. Thank
Yeah,
you.
of course.
I have a real stupid question.
No,
What's
I'm
the
sure it's
purpose
not.
of the roll?
Roll-ups, yeah. So roll-ups are usually so they roll up the plastic on the side of
Yeah.
your greenhouse,
So
and
you're adding another layer of plastic or insulation to your greenhouse.
actually this would be only plastic layer there is. So once they're up, it'll just lets the water not the water, but the air come in the greenhouse. So it's a good way to ventilate the greenhouse. So it's really just actually rolling the plastic on the side of your greenhouse, just so
Okay,
that it's
on the side, okay.
exposed to the outside. And it's a really great and efficient way to ventilate the greenhouse, because especially if you have the two sides, the wind can come in on one side and go out on the other side. So
Uh-oh.
it cools down really efficiently a greenhouse. But it can be a double-edged sword if it's not done well, because on a kind of partly cloudy day, it can get really hot really fast, and then really cold really fast. So if it's not automated, you always have to do back and forth to those. The great thing with Orisha is that he's going to do that for you.
Okay.
Just 1 second. Okay. And then other devices. So if you have other devices that would be connected to electricity, you just have to make sure before doing your test with the Orisha that all their breakers are on, because it doesn't mean that if your multifunction box is on, it's not going to be able to power your furnace if your furnace is plugged into 240 volts. So make sure that your that your breakers are on. If you have any propane furnace or any kind of fossil fuel furnace, just make sure that the propane valve or the fossil fuel valve is opened. And for your irrigation, just have to make sure that there's no frost or ice in or on your pipes, that your valves are clean also, because valves, if the water is not coming from a completely clean source, the valves can be clogged with all kinds of different mud or other things. And you also have to make sure that your pump is turned on and that your main valve is open as well. Once that's all done, Orisha also has a weather station that you can have. It consists of 3 different or 4 different sensors, but I'll focus on 3 in that case. There's a wind sensor that can close your roll-ups and your opening roof if you have one. It can close those if the winds are too strong. There's a rain sensor that can also close all of your openings if it detects rain. And there is a solar sensor that I'll talk a little bit more about later. You can correlate your irrigation to the amount of light that your plants get, and you can also automate thermal screens. I'll a little bit more on those applications later. But just to make sure that it's actually working, all of those 3 devices are connected to what we call our weather box that also communicates wirelessly with the central controller. The only thing you should have to do is just to plug it in the wall, and you should see it appear in your Orisha app. And you should see that you have a strength of a signal, and you should start seeing data from the solar intensity, solar accumulation, direction of wind, speed of the wind, and Rain, it just, does it rain, yes or no? So you should see yes or no for the rain. So all the devices are pretty much connected in the same weather box. So if you have signal for one, you should have signal for all of them. If for some reason one of the three sensors shows no signal, it might be something about the connections. If there's a problem with the connections, I recommend just opening the weather box, taking a picture of the connections, and giving us a call. And so, yeah, now that all your sensors are connected, we're down to testing devices. So one thing that we recommend doing when installing the Orisha system is that you're usually going to have one device per relay. And so in the door of the Orisha system, so just behind the switches, you'll have a sticker with all the numbers of the relays and a line just so that you can write which device is in which relay. So it's a good thing at the beginning of the season to just validate that there's actually something plugged in the relay that you're referring to on the door. So if it says valve 1 and relay 1, you should just make sure that there's actually something connected there. For some reason, someone might have changed something throughout the last season, and you just want to make sure, or might have disconnected things at the end of the last season. So you just want to make sure that they're actually connected. Once when that's validated, you can also make sure that in the app, the address of the device in the app is the same as it is in the door here. So the way that Orisha knows which signal to send to which relay box is that in the app you tell an address for each of the devices. If we look here, I kept that slide a little bit in French, but it doesn't change much. But the valve 1, its address is 9 and 1. So that what we can understand here is that the address of the multifunction box is 9. So if your central controller is communicating with more than one multifunction box, by telling it the address, it's going to know to which of those multifunction box to send the good signal. So in our greenhouse here, we have the multifunction box with the address 1, and our valve is connected in the first relay of that multifunction box. So we can just validate that all these addresses are good just by looking at the app and just saying that it concurs with what we have in our door. Once we're done with that, there are two ways to test devices. There are some devices like the roll-ups and the opening roofs for which you will have switches for, like actual physical switches. So for the roll-ups, you'll have those switches on the multifunction box. So there's one auto and manual switch for every side of your greenhouse. And then there's the arrow, there's a switch to make it go up or down for each side of the roll-ups of your greenhouse. And if you have an opening roof, you'll also have another box with those switches on specifically for that roof, where you can put it automatic or manual mode. Once you've validated that the manual mode works with the switches, you can put it to automatic mode for all of those switches, and then we'll do some tests with the automatic mode of the switches. And there's another manual mode that's actually in the app. So if you go to the control panel in the app that we call it, there are all your devices here. And so those devices, there's a way to put it in manual mode when you click on the icon of that device. So like our furnace here, if we click on the icon of the furnace, you kind of manually override the control of the Orisha on that device. So Orisha is basically based on an AI that knows when to turn on and off your devices just to make sure that it gets to the temperature target that you tell it. By putting it in manual override, you make sure that Orisha cannot control that device and only you have control on that device. You can put a device in manual mode for either a limited amount of time or until further notice. For that test, you could put it just in for a limited amount of time, just for the time that you're doing your tests. And then once the time is done, Orisha is going to take back control of the device. But when it's in manual mode, Orisha cannot do anything. So once it's in manual mode, you have the action button right here. So what you can do with that action button, when it's red, it means the device is off, and when it's green, it means the device is on. So if you click on the action button and it successfully turns from red to green or from green to red, you know it worked. So it works because the central controller sent a command to the multifunction box, and the multifunction box answered to the central controller saying, yes, I successfully did what you asked me to. If the central controller sends a command and does not get the confirmation afterwards, the action button actually turns to gray, just to signify that there's no signal. So if there's a message failure, it turns to gray. If it turns to either red or green, the multifunction box did its work. It's not did its job. It's not necessarily a guarantee that if the multifunction box did its job, that the device is actually on, because there's always other things that can happen. So if your breaker for your furnace is off, the multifunction box turned the relay on, but the furnace might not have turned on. So it's a good thing to just have your phone in your hand and be in your greenhouse and look at the devices that you want to turn on and just like put it manually in the app and just see that it's actually happening in the greenhouse. Just validate that it's the reality. It's physically happening in the greenhouse. And you should do that with the whole list of your devices that you have. So any heating devices that you have, any roll-ups, any other kind of opening like roofs, positive pressures, HAFs, thermal screens, heating pipes, and you name it. Once you can make sure that all of your devices are operational, we're down to creating programs. That's really where Orisha stands out compared to other automation companies. If we start first by our temperature program, I think that's one place where we really stand out. A lot of the companies, when you want to get to a specific temperature, I have my temperature in Celsius here, 24. I have no idea what 24 Fahrenheit. So 75 degrees. So yeah, let's say you want your greenhouse to be at 75 degrees. There are a lot of systems where what you have to input as a temperature program is just like conditions. So you could say like, if my greenhouse gets down to 70 degrees, I want my furnace to turn on. But if it gets to 78, I want my roll-ups to open 20%. And if it gets to 80, I want my roll-ups to open at 50%, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of things that you have to input just to get to your actual target, which is just, I want my furnace to be at 24 Celsius or 75 Fahrenheit. So yeah, the thing that you can do with Orisha is you just put your temperature target. And the great thing with Orisha is just that the AI knows how to get there with the devices that are available. So then once you know what's your target temperature, you can input it for different times of the day. So you have a target temperature for the day, for the morning, and for the night. And just so that you can make sure that you have strong plants, you can create a temperature program that's different depending on the cloud cover conditions in the greenhouse. Because if you get the same heat on plants when it's sunny as in when it's cloudy, if it's too hot when it's cloudy, your plants will tend to just grow in height and not necessarily in strength, or to make like good fruits. So you might want to just have a lower temperature when it's cloudy and a higher temperature when it's high. So Orisha allows you to do that really easily. So you can put different temperature target for when it's sunny, partly cloudy, and cloudy. There are two ways to input temperatures in Orisha. You have the mean temperature, which is just if you say that you want your mean temperature to be 24 for that period of the day. So when it's a sunny day, Orisha's goal is going to just be to make sure that by the end of that period, the mean temperature will have been 24 degrees Celsius or 75 Fahrenheit. The other way that you can do it is, if it doesn't work at a mean temperature, is that you can enter an interval. So you can say, I want my temperature to be somewhere between let's say 70 and 80, or I don't know, 20 and 25. And so the goal of Orisha is just going to be not to get past either the minimum or the maximum. So it's two different ways that can work well in different contexts. I know that for the winter, people will usually prefer the interval, because if you grow in the winter, you probably don't want your plants to get below freezing point. But it's okay if they get 30 to 40 degrees higher than that. It's not going to cause any damage to those plants. So you can have a really wider range with the interval. A mean temperature is more for the summer, where a lot of cultures like tomatoes, they just need a good average, like a 24-hour average. It's pretty consistent. So yeah, really depends on your needs. And then you can set up a ventilation priority. So there are many devices that can cool down a greenhouse, be it like positive pressures or negative pressures, or your roof or your roll-ups. And a good way to tell Orisha what you want to start first is just to click on the icon that corresponds to what you want to start first. So if you click on that fan icon here, what's gonna be turned on first is your positive pressure. And if your positive pressure cannot provide enough cooling air to cool down your greenhouse, in a second, secondly, your roll-ups or your roofs would open. So that's the first option. Second option prioritizes any openings, so roll-ups or roof. So it would open those completely. And if your roll-ups and roof don't provide enough cooling air to cool down your greenhouse, then your positive pressure would turn on. If you don't have a positive pressure, or if you don't have roll-ups, that's not going to be necessarily useful. It's just going to use whatever it has and do the best with it. And the third option here is what we really prefer. It is an option that it's going to depend on what it turns on or opens first based on the outside temperature. So Orisha can know the outside temperature with two different ways. You can either have a temperature and humidity sensor outside the greenhouse, or the central controller can be connected to the internet, and then it's just going to go fetch what's the outside temperature on a website. And based on that, if it's below 15 degrees, which below 59 Fahrenheit, it's going to prioritize the positive pressures or negative pressures to cool down the greenhouse, because the cold air coming into the top of the greenhouse is going to mix with the hot air in the top of the greenhouse before going down to the plants, just so to make sure that it's not going to stress your plants with air that's too cold. And if it's over 15 degrees or 59 Fahrenheit, what it's going to do is just open your roll-ups in priority or your roof, because they're more efficient to bring a lot, like a bigger air mass in the greenhouse to cool it down faster. Then you have a dehumidification program. The great thing about our dehumidification program is that what you see here is kind of a preset that's integrated in the Orisha system. We consulted a lot of greenhouse consultants and agrologists when creating Orisha, just to make a program that's really good for tomatoes. Why tomatoes? Because tomatoes are really drama queens with everything that comes with humidity. They really react strongly to a high level of humidity. So the program that we created here is really made for tomatoes. But all of the numbers that you see here can be changed to anything you like, but it's always a good place to start, I think. So Orisha uses a humidity deficit or vapor pressure deficit, depending on where you check how it's called. That's something that's calculated in grams per cubic meters. The interest of that is that there's actually, I'll share my screen too. One thing that I had earlier that was really useful about that. One thing with relative humidity is that, or actually the advantage of what vapor pressure deficit or humidity deficit is that it's really actually what the plants feel. So plants will transpire more water if it's drier, and vice versa. And so the way that the plants feel is not necessarily the relative humidity, but they feel the amount of water that's missing in the air before the air is saturated. So that's really what they react to the most. And so the way to picture that or to measure that is vapor pressure deficit or humidity deficit, which is the unit that we use here. And so there is a way to calculate that. I'll just quickly share my screen just on this here. So the thing with relative humidity is that 100% of relative humidity does not mean the same thing depending on the temperature in the greenhouse. So like 70% relative humidity does not mean the same thing when you're at 15 degrees outside or 59 degrees outside, or when you're at 24 or 75. So you always have to adapt that that target just to make sure that whatever the temperature is in the greenhouse, you get the good dehumidification to get to that target. The great thing with humidity deficit back here, is that your plants will need the same humidity deficit throughout their whole life and whatever the temperature is in the greenhouse. So once you set it up once, you're good to go for the whole season. So it's a bit of a learning curve, but once you're done, it's a set and forget, and you don't have to think about it. So yeah, as I was saying, it's the amount of air that's missing in it's the amount of water that's missing in the air just before the air is saturated in water. So that means that 0 grams per cubic meter is like the most saturated in water that the air can be. So the closer you get to 0, the more humid the air is. So the lower part of our target here is when you're going to want dehumidify. So during the day, if it gets lower than 3 grams per cubic meters, you would dehumidify. If it gets lower than 2.5 during the night, you would dehumidify. There are a few different ways that Orisha can dehumidify a greenhouse, either with the roll-ups or the positive pressure or with the furnace. So it would decide which one's the good way by either bringing drier air in the greenhouse or by heating up the air, just that there's more room in the air for water. So it would decide what's the best way to dehumidify the greenhouse based on the inside and outside temperature of the greenhouse and the inside and outside humidity of the greenhouse. So once it knows how to dehumidify a greenhouse, either with your roll-ups or with your fans or with heaters, you can limit how they're going to do it with those settings here. So if it dehumidifies with your roll-ups, it's going to open your roll-ups to 25% in that case, or to the specified percentage that you say here. If it does a pulse, either with a positive pressure or with a furnace, it's going to do that pulse with a for the duration here, so 6 minutes in our case. And after that pulse, just so that it's not always pulsing and just fighting with the temperature program, it's not going to do another pulse for the cycle duration, which in our case is 40 minutes. Then you can also specify with or without heating. So if you don't want heating to dehumidify your greenhouse, you can just uncheck the with heating. And if you do choose to heat your greenhouse to dehumidify, you can decide which devices are going to be used to dehumidify. Because you might have a furnace that's more effective than the other, and you might just want to use this one. Next program is a misting program. It's not really related to the dehumidification program, but it's just a way, again, to in that case, add water to the air. There are some plants like cucumbers that need misting sometimes just to prevent cucumber beetles. I think that's the name that people usually use. If you mist a few times, that will prevent the infestation of cucumber beetles. So yeah, you might want to create a temperature program, a misting program, I mean. And in that misting program, what you'll actually do is just set up a threshold. And if it gets drier than that threshold, you would dehumidify. So in our case here, if it gets over 9 grams per cubic meter, you would mist for 2 minutes. And after that 2 minutes, you would not mist for 45 minutes. Yeah, that's pretty much it for this one. Shading program is something pretty new in Orisha. You can set up a shading program in which you can the central controller can set commands to your shading screens, so that if the solar sensor senses that the solar intensity is too high, it would just deploy your shading screens just to add shade to your greenhouse. So you can set up a maximum solar intensity, like let's say 500 watts per cubic meter, square meters. And if it gets higher than that, it would just deploy your thermal screens or shading screens, and you'll get a nice shade on your greenhouse. If it gets again lower than that, it would just retract the shading screens, so just so that the sun can come in. Another thing that Orisha does just by default, you don't have to do anything about it with those screens, is that at night it's going to deploy the screen, and in the morning it's going to retract it. Just the screens like that, either thermal screens or shading screens, when you deploy them, it's a good way just to keep the heat lower in the greenhouse, and then you don't spend as much money heating your greenhouse, as I know that heating a greenhouse is pretty expensive. Last programs that we're going to see really quickly, irrigation programs. So there are 3 different programs that you can have with Orisha. The first one does not require any sensors, so it's just a timer-based irrigation program. We can see again our 3 icons that we saw earlier, so you can create programs for when it's sunny, when it's partly cloudy, or when it's cloudy. And so on a sunny day, this would be the times where your valves would start, and then et cetera, et cetera. So you'd get more valves triggered when it's a sunny day, and less valve triggered when it's a cloudy day. So you can just input at what times you want your valves to start on each of the cloud cover conditions. And then you can set up how much time the valve would be started each time the valve is triggered. So if you say that your valve is turned on for 3 minutes, it would turn on for 3 minutes at 8, 10, and 12 on a partially cloudy day, for example. The second program that we have with Orisha that we really like is with the solar sensor. I talked a bit about it earlier. The solar sensor is it's a sensor that what it measures is the solar intensity, but Orisha uses that to calculate how much solar energy has been received through that day. And so that's calculated in joules per square centimeters. Just to give you an idea, like a cloudy day, like the winter days that we had recently, are about 700 joules. And a really sunny day, like middle of the summer, would be something like 2,500 joules. So on really cloudy day, so the way that it works is you just say to your Orisha system that you want your valves to trigger every X amount of joules. So in our case, like every 100 joules. So on a really cloudy day, your valve would have been triggered 7 times, and on a really sunny day, it would have been triggered 25 times. Those numbers are purely fictional. Don't take my word for it. I'm not a greenhouse consultant, but yeah, gives you an idea that you can correlate the amount of light, the actual amount of light that your plants get, to the amount of time that they'll be irrigated. So the thing that you can enter is that you can create periods throughout your day based on when the sun rises and sets. So you can have a first period in your day where there's no irrigation, and then you can create a period like this one that starts 2 hours after sunrise. So that's what this means here. And you'll see that that corresponds to the number that you have here. So if the sun rose at 7:27 that day, the first period starts at 9:27. And those numbers are going to change every day because Orisha always knows at what time does the sun rise and sets every day. So it's really good for plants because usually you'd want to stop your irrigation about 4 hours before the sun sets. So with just creating that program, you could create an end period for that program where you could say, I want my irrigation to stop 4 hours before sunsets, and then so that time would just always move and move throughout the season. Yeah. So, and the last program that we have is the Tensiometer program. So, as I explained earlier, Tensiometer measures a soil tension in the soil, a soil water tension, and so the higher the number is, the drier your soil is. So what happened here is that so this program here is more like actual time based and based on the sunrise or sunset. But from 0 to 8 here, you would not have any irrigation. From 8 to 4 p.m., you would have irrigation. When the tension gets higher than 10 kilopascals, you irrigate for 6 minutes, and after that 6 minutes, you could not irrigate for 10 minutes. The last data, the 10 minutes, is a good way just to make sure that if your tension meter cannot get to a point where it actually senses that your soil is moist enough to not irrigate, it would not just like trigger irrigations after irrigations, because there might be reasons why your tension meter is not getting attention below your target. Let's say, for example, that your pipe is punctured or that your valve is closed or obstructed. You might not just want to trigger irrigations after irrigations, just because that might bring problems. Or if your tension meter is not placed at a good place that's relevant for the amount of water that your plants get. So that 10-minute or this number that can actually be changed to whatever you like is just a good way to make sure that you're going to have just like a safety, just to make sure that you're not going to put in too much water or not enough water in your soil. Last thing I want to see with you today is that Orisha also has alerts that are completely free that you can have on your system. They can be either texts or calls. So you can be texted on your phone to inform you of different problems, or called by a wonderful robotic voice that will tell you, of if anything's happening. There are two different kinds of alerts with Orisha. There are the general alerts. So there are 3 different alerts, all related to different parts of hardware of the Orisha system. So there's one for the central controller. If our servers cannot detect your central controller anymore, they can send an alert to your phone. So that's the first one. Second type of alerts with the multifunction box. So if the multifunction box is not powered anymore, or if it's not able to talk with the central controller, then the central controller would send an alert to your phone. And then the same thing for the sensors. If the batteries are down or dead, or if it cannot communicate with central controller, then the central controller would send alert to your phone. So it's a great thing, especially the one with the multifunction box, since it's directly plugged into an outlet in your greenhouse. If you activate that alert, it's a great way to know if you have a power outage at your greenhouse. Because if that alert goes on, you know that there's no power going to your multifunction box. So it's a good way to know that if you don't get it, everything's going fine. So that's the first type of alert. And the second type is temperature alerts. So you can set up minimum and maximum temperature alerts in your greenhouse. So if it gets colder at a certain point or higher than a certain point, you can get alert for both of those problems, just so that you can go see in your greenhouse what's going on. If it gets too cold, maybe it's because your furnace doesn't have any gas anymore or something like that, or sometimes it gets too high because it's a really hot summer day and the outside temperature is even hotter than your temperature target. So what can you do for this one? Maybe just open a door or something. But yeah, either way, you know that if you don't get any alerts, everything's going really well, you're smooth sailing. And if you do get an alert, Orisha is always there to tell you if there's something going on, so you can make sure that you're always aware of everything that's going on in your greenhouse. And that's pretty much it for me.